Hello and welcome. Well, the COVID-19 era we are living through has seen us more informed and concerned about our health and well-being than any other time in recent history, and with good reason. We now live our lives each day taking, precaution to protect ourselves and loved ones against contracting COVID. But at the same time, of course, we're sort of getting to that point where we've got a little bit of COVID fatigue. We've heard about it and spoken about it so much over the last few months. Well, today we're going to be discussing two topics relating to COVID. Both of these are quite new discoveries, and we're really excited to be sharing them with you. So firstly, the first point we're going to be speaking about is nutrition and how the use of vitamin D can help to combat COVID-19. Interesting, I know, stick with me. Secondly, the second one is the detection of COVID-19 in sewerage and what that means. So to help discuss this, we welcome our special guest, Sarah Smith, dietitian from Bayside Dietetics. Now, a little bit about our guest, welcoming her back. Sarah works in a private practice in Bayside, Melbourne, after working for an extensive period within a Monash Children's Hospital. Now, today, Sarah is going to discuss the benefits of vitamin D and also the link between our poo, wastewater and COVID-19. And I know what you're thinking, but stick with me on this one. First of all, Sarah, how are you?
I'm good, thanks, Rach. COVID fatigue for sure, but I'm really excited to chat today to get those. Just a couple of key points before we switch off from COVID altogether. There's a couple of things that I think are really important for everyone to hear about. So we'll try and nail those and let everyone move on in the safest way possible.
Love it. Okay, so just wanted to acknowledge we'd published a couple of your articles recently. The first one is titled, "Can a Nutrient Save Your Life During COVID?" And the second one is titled, "What's in Your Poo and How Can It Help During COVID-19?" So for someone who hasn't read either of these articles yet, can you please tell us what they are both about and, of course, what inspired you to write them?
The COVID time period has been, I've really loved the new information that's come out, and I felt I'm back at uni learning so much. So I was just inspired by these awesome scientists out there learning all this information to help us keep as safe as possible. The vitamin D article I wrote was really because there's so much good information about how protective this nutrient is with COVID. So we sort of initially thought about nutrition and COVID and thought, what could we do? And we weren't entirely sure. And now we know, hang on, let's nail that. And that's really, really important. So that article really talks to that. And the sewerage one was really, really a talent to get sort of the topic of poo into a blog. Like it's not a goal of mine, but it's something I talk a lot about is people's stools. So the article talked a lot of detail about what they're actually made up of, but the really interesting part at the end about how COVID links into your stool. So I'll talk about that. If you want to read more about where stools come from, go to the blog, and I'll just talk today just about the really COVID specific part in our chat today.
And in both of the articles, you link to a lot of studies and a lot of research as well. So they're really a fantastic source of information as well. So we're really, really honoured to be able to publish those for you. Now, to begin with, I believe there was an original theory based around, vitamin D playing a very protective role for people around the virus. So what is the key nutritional thing that we can do to help reduce our risk with COVID-19 then?
So what happened was people were noticing that those who were getting really, really sick with COVID, and this is from around the world, not Australia, this is, America, England, that kind of thing. Israel was doing a lot of work. They were noticing that people that were getting really sick with COVID were dark-skinned or in nursing homes. And there's a pattern there because those two groups are also the highest risk groups for having a low vitamin D level. And so there was this perception that maybe there was some sort of link between vitamin D and getting sick with COVID.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then they started to go beyond the link and sort of look at people's vitamin D. So those that were in hospital and checking their levels, how did that compare to the population? And it was certainly sort of reinforced that there might be a link because people that were getting really sick with COVID did have low vitamin D levels. And so just very recently, it's only just been published, but a few few trials are going on, and they've just released one from Spain, which is a really high quality study that actually went in and said, right, if we think there's a link between vitamin D and sort of getting unwell with COVID here, what if we supplemented those who have the COVID or are at high risk of getting COVID, and let's see what benefit people get from it. And it was extraordinary. There was a change in terms of risk of getting admitted to ICU. Those who got the supplement had a 97% reduced risk of being admitted to ICU.
That's incredible. 97%. That's an incredible
Yep.
stat.
Incredible, isn't it? Yeah, so significant difference with doing it. And the mortality rate, or the number of people that died amongst those who were getting supplemented, was 0. Not a single person getting a vitamin D supplement was getting it. Now, just a quick note on that, the vitamin D supplement they used was it was a form that's very, it's not an over-the-shelf one. It's a very
high
dense
dosage
source, shall we say? Yeah. So you sort of, it's not something that we can necessarily do too much with yet, but the studies are coming out, and this sort of idea that vitamin D and reduced risk of getting really sick with COVID is really looking really strong.
Okay, so adequate vitamin D levels may in fact protect us from becoming very unwell with COVID-19. Is that right?
Correct.
As a result of these studies and this research?
Yes, correct.
That's really incredible information for anyone to be able to learn and to be able to sort of just, take that information and do something with it. So how can we best then ensure that we have adequate sort of vitamin D levels in our body then?
Yeah. So vitamin D really comes from not the obvious. It actually doesn't come much from the Australian diet, so you can't really get it from food. Even though it's a vitamin, it's actually more likely that you'll get it from two sources. The first being the sun, and that's the most renowned and natural one you can get. Yep. So you will naturally make vitamin D by having sun exposure. So, and then hence that sort of correlation with people that were in nursing homes or people with dark skin who don't absorb the sun as well, having that increased risk of it. So in Melbourne, we know that the population's got a pretty low vitamin D level as a whole population. We struggle a bit. And it doesn't, like, I do wonder, I don't have any evidence for this is just personal speculation, but we're the state that's having the strongest or the most lingering COVID. We're the ones that are having COVID hang around, and we're also the state that's at the lowest, furthest away from the equator, with the exception of Tassie, who's an island, and I think that's sort of been protected for them, and they've done a really, really good job. But in Victoria, we've also got pretty low sun exposure for, and we've got the COVID hanging around. So I don't know if there's any sort of
correlation there. Yeah, that's food for thought. Yeah. But can I ask you, do you think it's worth supplementing vitamin D to reduce this risk then with the likes of supplements? Can that work, do you think?
Yeah, it is if you can't get enough sunlight. So sunlight is the first form, and I've dressed for the occasion with, for this, just to show everybody that in winter you can still get it. You put your vest on, you roll up your sleeves to get a bit more skin exposure, and you get out and get the sunlight if you can. Protect yourself from the sun. It happens above UV of 3. But if you can't do that, so whether you are in a nursing home, whether you are just your office job makes it really hard to get out in the sun, or if you have got dark pigment on your skin, then supplements seem to be a really good idea. They do a really good job. The supplements we have in Australia are really good forms that will boost our vitamin D levels. And it certainly looks like that they're a really useful thing to build up your system if you haven't got it.
Okay.
If you haven't got, if you can't get the sunlight, yeah.
And so then, okay, so it's definitely for everyone to be able to consider taking some vitamin D supplements, which will help. But now we're sort of heading into the warmer months everywhere else in Australia, of course, here in Victoria, everywhere. So, which is a great thing for us to get out and about and to be able to soak that into our skin. So how can we ensure that we're getting enough sun exposure for adequate vitamin D levels, but at the same time being sun smart?
Yeah, and it's such an important point that you've said, because it's really, we're not putting increased risk to save another. It's really that whole big picture. And I found Osteoporosis Australia actually had done some really nice work on this level to work out where that balance was. And so I'm going to quote their information, but it's a really nice website to look at too. They've recommended that above a UV of 3, 3 or above, sun protection is a priority. And below that, that's when you should aim for your sun exposure. So a UV level of 1 or 2, get out there, get some sun. as I said, rug up, and so you can get sort of more of your skin out there. And you'll vary between how much you'll need. As we sort of head towards summer, it's really only a few minutes is enough. You get really good doses in summer, but in winter, in most of the southern states, including even Perth, Sydney are low enough for this. You really do want to have, up towards 3 hours per week of sun exposure.
Okay. All right. So Osteoporosis Australia have suggested, let me make sure I've heard this right, that when the UV rating is 3 and above, sun protection is the priority, whilst lower ratings, sun exposure for vitamin D, may be helpful. So how do we know when the rating's at 3 then? How do we understand?
Yeah, good question. There is a really nice, there's a couple of areas. Cancer Council of Australia, their website will give you that information. There's an app called the SunSmart app, and that will also give you the daily UV ratings, and it can also give you a message each day. If you sort of, as somebody who forgets to look yourself, you just want a reminder sent to you, you can organise to get that app to send you a daily message of the UV.
What is that one called again, Sarah? That's called the Sun.
It's the SunSmart app.
Cool.
Yeah. Yep. And then the final one is, I'm going to get this wrong, but there was uvaustralia.org. I'll tell you what, I'll give you the link and put that on there, but there's a specific website that's just about UV rays in Australia, so you can plug that into.
Okay, great. So when the UV rating is 3 and above, sun protection is a priority. So we have to be able to protect our skin with sunscreen. But whilst the ratings of 3 or below, sun exposure for vitamin D can definitely be helpful. So in summary, adequate vitamin D levels seem to be protective around COVID-19 virus, it seems, which is great. And that we could obviously get this through sun exposure and low UV levels, and then also perhaps through vitamin D supplements. This is an incredible sort of thing for us to discover. When did this all come about? Is this just recent, in the last few weeks, or?
Yeah, the most recent Spanish study has been just recently. They look at the supplementation of it. So that's a very, very recent. It just was published in, they released it slightly early, but October is the date of publication for that. So we're bang onto it. But I would say, like, the information on sort of the query about vitamin D happened reasonably early. Like places like the UK they noticed that of the deaths in England from coronavirus, there was 5 times more likely that individual had dark skin. So we just had this very early sort of, the scientists had this very early idea that's just built and built and built until this really recently released information.
Okay, great. So this is a really great tip for us to be sun smart this year, whilst the UV levels are low, and then otherwise to be able to consider getting some vitamin D supplements. So thank you for that tip. This is extraordinary. Now, in your second article, you speak about the wonders of our gut. And you mentioned that there is another study, and in particular, scientists in Brisbane have made a clever discovery. But can you tell, like, what is this about, I guess, COVID-19 in our sewerage? Can you please explain what this discovery is?
Yeah. And again, I marvel at these scientists, just the lateral thinking, and so much has been going on to really help us all with COVID. So it's another thing that really excites me to talk about. But it started overseas, but there was observations that in sewage plants, they were getting detection of the COVID virus in there. And so it does make sense to us, because we know that our stools are mainly bugs. That's what the stool is mainly made up of. They're predominantly bugs excuse me, that live in the gut, and so it's natural that they'll come out. But we also know that COVID seems to get to a few different areas of the body. So the COVID also seems to come out into the stool along with the other gut bugs. So if you have infected with COVID, the chances are you will emit some of that COVID virus out into your stool. So what the clever people have done is really looked at it and said, well, if it comes out in your stool, then if we look at sewage plants, we're going to know whether or not the people in the area that this sewage plant comes from if there's any detection of coronavirus in that area.
Wow.
So it started out in Brisbane. I did notice last week, this was sort of towards the end of September, in New South Wales, it was also really useful, because what the COVID numbers were saying was that there was no new cases in New South Wales. but at the same time, there was detection of COVID-19 in the sewerage plants in New South Wales. So there was an indication that while the testing was zero, there was still COVID in the community because it was coming out into the stools.
That's incredible. So the studies have detected the untreated wastewater that is infected with COVID-19 is likely and can affect others, but it's a great way of us detecting and tracking, I guess, COVID levels within the community. Is that right?
Exactly right. So it's not an individual. You can't. No one's ever going to know whose stool it came from, whose house it came from. It's a collection of just the population or the local area whose wastewater goes to that sewage plant. You can tell whether that community has got COVID in that community or not.
Okay. And so you speak and you've spoken about bugs and their relation to our lives. But the bugs you speak about are dead bugs like bacteria, virus, fungi. And how do you pronounce the other one that is archaea? Or how do you pronounce the other one that's found?
Yeah, good question. I don't know.
But there's another one in our digestive system. So I'd love to know then, how do all of these bugs, as we just said, bugs being bacteria and viruses and all those types of things that are naturally and fungi that are in our digestive system, how do they sort of help our digestive system? Just overall, this is just an FYI than anything else.
Yep. No, great question. They do a lot of the digestion for us, is the simple answer to it. Yeah. So as humans, we can do a lot of the digestion of food for ourselves, but there's some of it that we can't do. So we have evolved with bugs in our system, at the very end of our system, to do that digestion. And then what happens is when they digest the last remnants of food for us, we get the nutrients from the job that they do. So we get the last bits of nutrients of goodness through these bugs digesting food for us.
Okay, so bugs help with the process known as fermentation, which is to digest some of the food in our body. And during the fermentation process, they create byproducts and they're released. Is that right? So how do these byproducts keep us healthy then? How does that work?
We absorb them. So we've got this really nice blood supply to our gut. So all the good stuff from the food and the digestion of food or the fermentation of the food by the bacteria, we can get that goodness straight into our bloodstream. We can take it around our body and use it. So there's some really nice gases, for example, that will cross from the intestine into the bloodstream. There's also a couple of vitamins that will cross over in that last little phase. So it's a really clever system that's set up for us.
So some of the bacteria in our gut then will ferment leftover food particles, but that will release compounds, and that sort of stuff helps stabilize our sugars and improve our immunity overall. Is that what it is?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, the immunity thing's quite a new thing too that we're learning more about, but we seem to think that really good gut health, and that's what we talk about when we talk about good gut health. It's a really good picture of those bacteria and things, a healthy what's the best word for it? But the right sort of bacteria in the gut for who you are as a person is called a healthy gut, and there seems to be a lot of benefit from that, a lot of benefit from just feeling good in the time to really reduce risk of disease later on, for sure.
Cool. Well, this has been a really fascinating discussion today with some incredible pieces of research that you've shared with us. And of course, relating to the two topics that we mentioned also, of course, the use of vitamin D and in its use to help combat COVID-19. And secondly, the detection of COVID-19 in sewerage and just what that means overall. So for anyone watching and listening, what are the key messages that you would love for people to take away from this chat today then?
Yeah, I think there's really one key message, and that is to really make sure you've got enough vitamin D to reduce your risk of getting really unwell with COVID. Whether it's through the sunlight exposure or through supplementation, either way will work well or seems to work quite well to reduce your risk. And I will just add on to that, I sort of talked a lot about supplementation, and vitamin D supplementation is very safe, Rach. We're not recommending something that is harmful, but I still think before you do anything like that, just touch base with your GP or your dietitian, identify if you're high risk of not having enough vitamin D. You don't need a blood test, just simple chat about sunlight exposure, and then supplementation. It could really make a difference to if you happen to get exposure to COVID, whether or not you're going to get sick or not.
Awesome. And if anyone's got any other questions for you, whereabouts can they find you then?
My website's the best bet for me. It's www.baysidedietetics.com.au.
Awesome. Sarah, this has been really, really fun. I love learning new things as well, as I do each and every day, but this in particular, where it's directly related to sort of helping save lives, is just incredible. So thank you so much for sharing this information with us today.
My
And of
pleasure. Thanks
course,
for having me.
yeah, and we'll have all the links, of course, to your website and a lot of those studies and those apps also in the show notes. But thanks again, and look forward to catching up with you soon in the not too distant future. But take care and stay safe in the meantime. Take care.
Thanks, Rach.
Bye.